You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at KeeleyCompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the two-time national best-selling author of On Fire and In Awe. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, the host of the Live Inspired podcast, and he's the real-life inspiration behind the major motion picture Soul on Fire. Each week, John interviews extraordinary individuals about their life stories so you can more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. To kick off this episode, I do have a question for you on the front side. Have you ever caught yourself reacting to something and thinking, why did I do that? Well, whether we realize it or not, the experiences we had actually growing up shape us more than anything else in our life today. They influence how we handle stress. They influence how we show up in relationships. They even influence the way we talk to ourselves when no one else is even around. And that's why today's conversation matters so much for me, for my family, and I think friends, for you. Not so we can blame our past and our parents and our siblings and our teachers for the way we are in our life today, but so we can better understand ourselves as we show up fully in our lives today. Because once we recognize a pattern, we also have the beautiful opportunity, the agency to change it, to make it better. Today, our guest is Gibson. She's a counselor. She's a relationship expert. She's the founder of the Personal Development School. And yet, before helping others transform their lives, she found herself as a teenager struggling with addiction, dealing with anxiety, and also the lingering effects of a difficult childhood. Her own healing journey led her to study why we think, why we feel, why we react the ways we do. And today, she helps people around the world build healthier relationships with themselves, that's where it starts, and with others. Today, Thais shares how our subconscious mind influences so much of our daily lives, why emotional safety matters more than most of us even realize, and what it takes to break free from old patterns. We talk about her battle with addiction. We talk about loneliness that so many people are dealing with today. And we discuss the simple practices that can help us become more connected, more compassionate, and more present in our lives. Well, family and friends, brothers and sisters, if you've ever wondered why you keep repeating the same habits, struggling with the same fears, or feeling disconnected with people that you love, this conversation is for you. You will walk away with practical tools, fresh perspective, and the reminder that no matter what you've been through, it's not too late to create a different future for you tomorrow. So let's bring her on, my friend, now yours, Thais Gibson. Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think knowing your backstory and everything that you do is so beautiful. So grateful to be here.
Well, I think you are attracted to folks who have a wild story and then what they do with those stories afterwards and how they connect not only with themselves, but with others. Same here. And I'm really amazed and inspired by your story, by where you've been, by where you are, and by what you're doing with it today. So let's begin here. If I happen to meet you randomly on a dock somewhere, and I said to you, Thais, what do you do? How would you respond to that?
People are always like in business, oh, put an elevator pitch together and all these things. I sometimes don't know how to explain very well what I do, but I am a counselor by trade and counselor and coach. I spend a lot of my time nowadays acting more in the role of a teacher. So I end up, I worked in private practice for about the better part of a decade and then had a big wait list in my practice and moved into the online space, sort of thinking, well, I'll put some online workshops together for people. And that was about 7 years as the online space was really picking up. and eventually built the personal development school. And I retired my practice because it got so busy in there over time that what I basically end up spending time doing is teaching people pretty much daily classes and helping them understand how their subconscious mind works and how they can rewire it and how their nervous system works, and helping them also understand their patterns that they bring from their childhood relationships into their adult life, and how to really change the hand of cards you've been dealt if you went through a lot and you're looking to sort of create a different future for yourself.
Hmm. Most of us do what we do because something formed us at one point in our life or another. You and I talked right before I hit record a little bit of my story and a little bit of yours. Was there an inflection point in your story that drew you into the work you're doing today?
Absolutely. I mean, it's sort of like an inflection point for me that was so pivotal. It almost felt like it was out of a movie. Nothing dramatic, but just the impact on me was very much so. And for me, my backstory is that I grew up in a quite turbulent household, lots of fighting and lots of chaos and very intense things, and grew up being a very sensitive kid and the eldest of two. So I was always sort of in the middle of everything and internalized a lot of things. And by the time I was 15, I had one goal as a kid, and it was get out of my house and get a soccer scholarship and go to the US and start a different life. And that was a really intense dream for me. And I think a part of it was just to have that freedom, like to have
Yeah.
that freedom of choice and be very independent and just not be caught in, a lot of difficult things. And then in one of my scouting years, I had a bad knee surgery. And I think that was my one coping mechanism, was to play soccer. So that one thing was taken away. And suddenly I was back in my home more often because I wasn't out at soccer in the evenings every night. And, my house wasn't the most comfortable. I didn't feel super safe in my house all the time. And so, I suddenly was prescribed painkillers and became addicted to opioids, like pretty much overnight. And didn't even know, I was 15 years old when I was in that beginning thick of it. And I didn't even really like know much about what addiction was or
Right.
things like that. I just knew that, gosh, life seems a lot easier when I'm having to take these, and it just took the edge off. And that turned into continuously saying that I was in more and more knee pain to renew the prescription, which then turned into, a few months in, I'm going to find somebody to get them from, and found somebody a couple years older at school and started buying them, and really, really struggled for about 6.5 years. And I was really in a rock bottom place in my life. I did get a soccer scholarship, but to a much smaller D1 school than was originally in the cards for me, and really went off to school and struggled. I thought, oh, I'm going to get out of here and then I'll get sober and I'll turn my life around when I'm in a different place. And it got worse before it got better. And I was in a psych class one day. I went to school for psychology, and I was thinking, like, on this very particular day, how am I going to stay here? Like, what am I doing
Yeah.
here? Like, everything, on the outside, I know everything looks great. I have a full soccer scholarship and whatever. But on the inside, like, I was scared of being drug tested because the NCAA randomly drug tests you. And my dorm was a mess. Everything was just a mess. I was having a hard time showing up for classes, and I was just hanging by a thread. And somebody said to me in a psychology class, well, I was reading this book on the weekend, and your conscious mind can outwill your subconscious mind.
So, by the way, I've heard you several times use that expression. It's so
My
good. And
favorite.
on a
Yeah.
podcast, when we're dropping the kids off at school or running on the treadmill or rowing in the backyard, we miss sometimes the moments that might actually change our life if we hurt them. So
Yeah.
we say that again.
Absolutely. Your conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower your subconscious mind.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so it means that your conscious mind is like, if you look at the Freudian iceberg diagram, your conscious mind is that little tip of the iceberg, what you see above the surface. And our conscious mind is our logical thinking mind. It's like what we think of as ourselves, the part of us that recognizes our thoughts or is analyzing through things or making choices. That's our conscious mind. And it's responsible for roughly 3 to 5% of all of our beliefs, our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, where subconscious and unconscious collectively are 95 to 97%. And that's the warehouse of your conditioning. So that's the part of you that, if you grew up, for example, always hearing, let's say in people's common experiences, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money. Well, because you hear those things repeatedly, that's likely to become a program. Whatever you're exposed to through repetition fires and wires neural networks in your brain. And then you take those on, and now you might believe that as an adult. Or if you saw relationships being all about fighting growing up, parents are always fighting like cats and dogs. Well, then that's why we see 88% of people who come from an abusive household end up in abusive relationships as either the victim or perpetrator, because that's their conditioning. That's what they think love and relationships are. And so we pick up all of these programs in our early childhood. And of course, conditioning goes on our whole lives. It's not just childhood, but the deepest roots run through childhood, particularly up until the age of 8. And we take all this conditioning and we don't recognize that that's responsible for 95+% of our choices and how we live and how we talk and what we expect from other people and how we expect to be loved and communicated with and how we expect ourselves to move in the world and what our fears are and our limitations. All of that is in our subconscious conditioning. And to me, one of the wildest things is that's determining really the course of your life
Mm.
and all these choices that we make. And yet, most people aren't even familiar with how their own subconscious mind works. So that's been a big part of the work I got so involved in because in my own journey, when I was able to understand what I was numbing all the time and what I was running from was actually all these fears and wounds and limiting beliefs that I had and nervous system dysregulation because of my own conditioning, and then go into rewiring that. The journey into sobriety and into building healthy relationships in my life became quite simple and extremely fulfilling in ways that I would have never ever thought were in the radar for me and or even a possibility. But because of being able to change that, that's what allows everything else outside of you to change.
Mm. So you're 21 in a psych class, your dorm room's a mess, your life is a mess, you're addicted
Yes.
and you're broken and you're struggling wildly internally,
Angry at the world too, angry, sad, it's
right?
just, yeah, I'm struggling.
So walk me through in your own personal case, like what's the next right step? And then what do you follow that with?
It's a great question. I would love to say that I learned that and suddenly got sober. It did not go like that. But I was able to start investigating in these. I was definitely a very high functional addict. Like I was good at kind of masking and hiding how much I was suffering and showing up just enough for things to not get caught or not be called out or not be the
Right.
black sheep and just really suffering inside. And I was very angry. And very, in all honesty, I very much thought I was the victim. I was like, I'm the victim. I'm this way because I went through the things I went through in childhood, a lot of anger and hurt. And when I started really looking into that, a couple of things happened for me that were really dramatic. I had a couple of really good mentors come into my life. I went through a couple of other hard things that took me to my knees, definitely to a rock bottom where I was like, hey, God, if you exist, because I was raised I never went to church or I wasn't in any sort of religious family growing up. And there's a couple things that coincided basically. So a couple of mentors, and then I decided if God exists, God, I'm ready. Please help me. I've had enough.
Yeah.
And I think that brought some things into my life, this willingness to step into humility and to look
Mm.
for something greater than myself. And then at the same time, I had been to AA meetings, I had been to rehab, I'd done things in between summer semesters before up until that point, but nothing stuck. But because I understood there was like a subconscious mind component, I started going to meetings and sort of these three things coalescing at the same time allowed me to put myself in a position where like things started to change. And I had moments, it wasn't like I got sober, I had moments about over the next year, year and a half where I relapsed a couple of times, struggled again. Like it wasn't some nice, easy, cut and dry journey. But I think because I started actually investing myself in things, I really found a relationship to God during that process as well in a very meaningful way that was very life-changing. And to be honest, this is my journey. I won't speak for everybody.
For sure.
But to me, what allowed things to stick was that I found so much through my relationship to God. And I got into all sorts of, studying different religions and then found things that really worked for me. But then I understood wiring and how our mind works. And I remember sitting, and one of the first things I tried is I really sat in meditation. And one of my mentors said, hey, one of the things you're running from is your thoughts all the time. And you have to practice sitting and noticing your thoughts in meditation. I think I was like 20 and a half at the time. Meditation, this is like 15 plus years ago. Meditation back then, like that wasn't mainstream. It wasn't like it is now. And I thought it was crazy, but I was willing to do anything. I was like, please, God, like take my suffering. And so I remember sitting in meditation one day and sitting down and saying, okay, I have to, my goal here is to witness my thoughts. And as I started listening to my thoughts for the first time and actually noticing them, I heard myself say, this is stupid. You're stupid. You're going to fail at this like you fail at everything. And what's the point of even trying? Like, why are you even bothering? And I remember thinking, like, oh, this is what I'm running from. The way I speak to myself and how that makes me feel. And then my feelings don't feel good. And now I'm numbing. And so I got into a point where I was able to start practicing these different practices and in many different ways. And that was extremely healing. But I also understood the power of rewiring. I wasn't just going into like Buddhism and Christianity, which were my original points of starting into that. It was that combined with understanding about the subconscious. And I would read in these little bouts of sobriety how my subconscious worked and how neuroplasticity worked and how to rewire. And my first certification I ever did was in hypnotherapy for a year to understand what the subconscious is all about. And so those two worlds together of like spirituality and neuroscience helped me have a really deep, intricate understanding of myself and what my patterns were and what my wiring was. And chipping away at that with ups and downs for about a year and
Yeah.
a half allowed me to finally get rooted.
Gosh, there's so much there. I think I want to go in the direction of the beautiful amalgamation of faith and science. We live in a world right now where those things seemingly have to live separately. And there's profound power, I think, when you recognize that they are undividable, like they live in harmony perfectly. So, as you were going down this path of researching who God is and who God is in your life and how to draw closer to that course for your life journey and tying this into the science and neuroplasty and subconscious and everything else, what are you learning less about macro research and more about how this applies for you individually? What are you experiencing yourself?
So, one of my favorite things, and it was because I was spending a lot of time deep diving into this stuff, like for hours and hours. I was obsessed. I almost like took my one addiction and transformed it into this
Yeah,
addiction
that's
to,
common.
to learning and God. Yeah, it was very intense for me. And one of the things that I would arrive upon a lot, and I would like to think that this is divinely guided and that, God's guiding everybody's lives divinely if they're listening hard enough. And I would have these really powerful experiences where I would be reading about something from a neuroscience perspective, and then it would appear because I was studying multiple religions at the time. I just knew that like God existed. I wanted to find some sort of relationship. And I'll give you an example. So I remember one day, and this would happen to me all the time, and I think these were like kind of divine synchronicities. So I remember reading a Buddhist book, and it was talking about how if you can witness this pen in front of you, you are not the pen.
Mm,
And if you can witness your thoughts, you are not your thoughts. And there's a part of you behind all of your thoughts that has the ability to witness. You have a higher state of consciousness. And
yeah,
and the idea was that in this book was that that higher state of consciousness is what connects you to God. It's from that space when you're not bothered by all your conditioning, your ego mind, your small self. When you're able to sort of step behind that and be in witnessing consciousness, you have access to this higher part of you that's connected to love and everything else. And it's this all loving part of you. And so I remember reading about that and thinking, okay, I should practice that. And then that evening, I was reading this PubMed study and it was talking about how they took these participants who had a lot of anger. And that was like my sin was I was very angry at the time. That was my struggle. And I would get angry and, I was very reactive at the time, which is funny because, I'm very the opposite of that for quite a long time now. But it's funny to think back, like I really struggled with that. And I read this study, and they said that people who struggled with anger, researchers put them into fMRI scanners, and they had them recall things they were really angry about. And they would watch what happened in their brain. And if you look at the brain from the top down, they would see that all the brain activity in your prefrontal cortex, your like higher thinking mind, would drain out, and all of this brain activity would light up in like the amygdala. And you're suddenly your reptilian self in a way, your reptilian brain, right? You're in this like fight or flight space. And then the researchers had participants witness their emotions
yeah,
instead of being identified with them and label their emotions and say, like, okay, I'm feeling anger, and anger feels like heat in my chest and down my arms. And what they found is that when people stopped telling the story and getting caught in the thoughts and stopped identifying so much with the emotions and were instead able to witness their emotions and describe the sensations, all this brain activity lit back up in the prefrontal cortex. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is what I was reading this morning in this book that was telling me to witness my thoughts and my emotions instead of being so identified with them. And one of the quotes
yes,
in that book said, the more identified we are with our thoughts and emotions, the more we suffer.
yeah,
And that was exactly what was happening in this study. It was saying the same thing. And these things would happen to me so often because I was reading from all these places and I would always feel like, okay, this is truth. When you hear it in these sort of ancient wisdom practices and then you hear it in neuroscience, that's the truth. And I would really commit to practicing those things that I had found this sort of like root of what I perceived as being, okay, this has to be truth because from these two extremes, there's this overlapping middle point. And that happened to me so often in my journey that was those were how I sort of made my choices and installed my habits. I really chose those things that I felt were rooted in truth. It was such a beautiful experience. I'd get so excited and inspired when that would happen. And those were these sort of divine synchronicities that I think really kept guiding me in my healing journey.
Help us understand, how do we rewire? You talked about the sin of anger. You're not the only one that has that, or the sin of self-loathe. You're not the only one who might have struggled with that. And we all walk into the party with our own profound challenges. Some of us don't even know that they exist. That's just how we show up. And we've always been angry, or we've always been self-loathing, or it's always been our parents' fault. Always. How do we identify it? And then how do we begin to redeem it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, the very first thing is the ability to introspect. And I think that one of the hardest things for people is that they hear different teachings, but they don't necessarily recognize those parts of themselves. And so it's really powerful to spend the time. And that's why I really like, habits and practices like meditation or prayer, because it helps you practice noticing what's going on inside of yourself, inside of your life, and really be present with some of those experiences, even just small things like journaling. Once we identify the patterns that are showing up for us, one of the biggest things when it comes to rewiring that I tell people all the time is we want to have compassion for ourselves, because those painful programs that we're running, they're not coming from a place of, oh, you're a bad person and that's why you choose these things. They're coming from a place of, I'll use myself as a personal example. Like, I was really mad at myself for being an angry person at one point in my journey, but that's not helping. It's like, he who hates evil only creates more of it, right? You hate your anger and now you have more anger. And so it's really important to next, after we
Hmm.
identify a pattern, to actually sit in that and witness ourselves with compassion. Hey, where did this come from? And where are its roots? And in my own life, I saw a lot of anger, and I learned to have to be angry to protect myself, because when I also got angry, then that gave me a shield. That gave me protection. If I could get angry enough, I actually didn't end up in as scary of situation. So anger was a very protective mechanism for me. And I realized, okay, rather than shaming myself, I'm going to have compassion for myself that this is a pattern. And then there's sort of two other steps. There's lots of ways to rewire, but the next two steps are that usually everything that we do that we don't like is meeting a hidden need for us.
Hmm.
So
Tell me
for
a bit
me,
more about that.
yeah, so I judge my anger at the time, and I'm mad at it, but then I can have compassion because I'm doing this work to see that that came from a place of coping. But when I look more closely in this third step, I can say, well, what need does anger meet? What I found for myself is that, and I found this with every person who's ever struggled deeply with anger, is that anger always, actual anger challenges always happen to people who feel for long periods of time first deeply unseen, unheard, powerless, and boundaryless. What's very interesting is if you look at anger, what does anger do? Anger gets you big and loud, so you get seen and heard. It sets a boundary because you push people
Wow.
away with your anger, and you take your power back. When you finally say everything on your mind and you get it big and you seem to be in this sort of upper hand of a power struggle. And I realized, like, wow, because I don't really know how to be seen and heard, because I'm not communicating, I'm not being vulnerable with people. Vulnerability was like a no-no for me growing up because I don't know how to be vulnerable. Then, when I get angry, that's the only way I express myself. And then I finally get seen, heard, take my power back, and set a boundary in one fell swoop. And so anger is a subconscious strategy to get those needs met all at once. And so, what I then allowed myself to do is recognize, well, then my way, I don't believe in treating symptoms, I believe in treating roots. And so, my way out of that was going to be through practicing vulnerability so I could get seen and heard, practicing healthy boundaries ahead of time so I wasn't holding things in and then setting them all at once from a place of anger, and learning that there's no such thing as an upper and lower hand between people, but there's healthy self empowerment that comes through honoring my truth, being authentic with people, honoring my boundaries, and speaking up for myself and on a regular basis. And when I course corrected for the roots beneath the anger, I didn't have to do anger management. I didn't have to do anything else. The need for anger dropped away. And so that was a practice. And to rewire your subconscious mind from a neuroscience perspective, we need
Right.
between 21 and 63 days, depending on if it's action or emotion based. Action based is like 63 days of practicing a new behavior that then through time fires and wires new neural networks in your subconscious mind that are strong enough to stick. And so for me, that was very action based. There's other rewiring we can do that's more emotion based. It's a little faster, but that was action based, which was practicing vulnerability, practicing speaking up, practicing healthy boundaries. And as I practiced that for 63 days, and that became my new set point at a subconscious level, I no longer had to struggle with anger.
Oh my goodness. So this has worked for you. And I'm just putting myself in the vehicle of someone driving down the road right now with three kids yelling at each other, and the dog is barking, and the bills are late. And they are thinking, when in the heck will I find 63 days to use the restroom on my own, let alone go through this process of getting to know who I am and whose I am and how to improve. And so when you think about the complexity of living a busy life, as you do, as we all do, help us get clear on, first of all, why we should make the time for this. And secondly, how to begin making the time for this.
So let me say two things. So, gosh, I'm going to try not to give you the longest winded answer on the planet here, but but two things. Well, at a high level, it's always more work not to do the work. Okay. Your anger causes a lot more devastation and destruction in its wake or whatever the problems are. When we're talking just behavioral reprogramming, so around like things like unhealthy expression of anger, the action of it is something done in real time. And I keep going back to anger as the example, but the best thing is when you become less identified with your emotions first and you witness your emotions, you have a little bit of space around them. So, one thing I practice very intensely is when I would feel that anger coming up, I would start by just noticing the sensations in my body instead of getting into the whole story, right? So I would be like, oh, anger, there's the heat in my chest and the cold down my arms, and here's the clenching of my jaw. And I would unclench my jaw and practice letting myself just notice the sensations so that I knew my prefrontal cortex is coming back online because I'm identified with noticing the sensations and witnessing rather than being in the story.
Ty, give me one more emotion outside of anger. So put yourself in the shoes of someone next to you.
Anxiety.
What anxiety? Okay,
Questioning
that's a great.
anxiety.
We all
Yeah.
have that. So walk us through this example with anxiety, please.
Okay, so let's say somebody's sitting there and they are feeling extremely anxious. Maybe they're driving in the car, they've got their kids in the back and they're really anxious. They're running late to somewhere, they just feel so overwhelmed. If you watch yourself closely in those moments, you're actually adding to your own anxiety because you're sitting there thinking, I'm going to be late and then this bad thing's going to happen and then this bad thing is going to happen and then this. And your thoughts are taking you for a ride. And then we are creating this vicious cycle of thought, emotion, and it's making our anxiety worse.
Yep.
So when we can start by, if I reference that study, that we need to get our prefrontal cortex back online, become conscious of what's happening, the first thing is you would notice the actual emotions happening in your body and the sensations. So rather than telling the story, all these bad things are going to happen and we're going to run late, you would practice witnessing those sensations in your body. And in this case, if you feel this anxiety, what does anxiety feel like? Well, it feels like pins and needles in your chest, knots in your stomach, racing of your heart, extra fast breathing. This is called somatic processing. Okay. So that's the first thing we do is we can somatically process. And that actually allows us to have a little bit more room. And then from there, what we would do to behaviorally rewire if we were going to take a new action. So, the past example I was giving was anger. I had to practice speaking up vulnerably instead of holding things in and then getting angry later. So, with the vulnerability, I might say, oh, hey, that's actually not okay for me. Can we do this instead? If somebody's feeling anxious, they might set a boundary in that moment. And maybe that boundary is that they say to their kids more calmly, hey, I'm actually feeling distressed right now. I need a little bit of quiet time. Or if their kids are not listening to them, and that's easier said than done, then when they arrive at that location, they may then go take 5 minutes for themselves and drop their kids off and take 5 minutes to do some breathing or something that's allowing them to quell the root issue around that anxiety. And so
Mm.
by doing somatic processing and then practicing a new behavior other than this old autopilot behavior that we usually follow, like maybe somebody feels anxious and then they scream at their kids because they're so overwhelmed. And now they have the guilt of screaming at their kids, the anxiety about now being a bad parent, and they're judging themselves. And then they're in this vicious cycle. Well, part of rewiring is being able to witness what's happening in real time and actually change the pattern of behavior. And again, this is a behavioral rewiring tool. I actually usually focus more on belief rewiring, but it's a really powerful place to start. And it helps us not just be playing out our autopilot patterns from childhood and past experiences over and over again.
Mm. Why is emotional safety the foundation for a transformation?
Well, emotional safety is what allows you to actually be in your body and recognize the feedback that your body's giving to you. So, what happens too often, we hear the term dissociation, and people think of dissociation as being a very scary thing. Oh no, people are dissociated. They don't remember anything. Yeah, that's a very extreme form of dissociation, but people are quite dissociated in a mild way all the time. Like dissociation, for example, is you're stressed on your way home from work and you decide that you're going to get home from work and binge watch television for 3 hours or scroll on social media, or you're going to just drink wine while you're sitting with your kids and you're going to zone out. And there's this component of self avoidance, right? We're going
Mm.
to numb out. We're not going to look at the problem. Well, emotional safety means that you're cultivating enough presence and awareness to come and be in your body and notice what's going on. And it's only through that ability to really notice what's happening at an inner world level that we have the capacity to change anything. Otherwise, our subconscious mind's just playing things out on repeat. We'd always do this thing when we cope, or we'd say those things, or we retreat to the other room and slam the door, or people play out these old patterns. We have to feel emotionally safe enough within ourselves and regulate our nervous systems enough to notice what's happening within our bodies. And then to notice, oh, what can I do differently this time around? And that helps us bring our conscious awareness back online so we can start breaking down and changing those patterns.
Mhm. I mean, so much of what you're putting forward in front of us is awareness, which is very difficult to do when you're staring down at a screen. So whether you're talking to the teenagers listening to our conversation or to their grandparents or anybody in between, what do you want us to know about the idea of where our thoughts go so to our life and what we pay attention to expands? Like what should we be aware of as we in autopilot go through our life?
Great question. I think one of the things that happens is we don't realize that our diet isn't just made up of food. Our diet is made up of everything we consume on a daily basis, and everything that you consume on a daily basis is conditioning you. People are always being programmed. In fact, just as an example, when somebody's watching television, they're actually in a suggestible state. Like that's why people pay so much money for Super Bowl commercials. If somebody's watching television, their brains are producing alpha brain waves. And have you ever had the experience where somebody's watching television and you're like, Bob. And Bob's like in the television and he can't even hear you on the periphery. That's because he's actually in a state of trance. We're actually in a brainwave state where we're super sponging in information. And so, for people who are watching people fight on television all the time, that's going to condition you over time. If you're seeing certain things on social media all the time, whatever we are exposed to through repetition and emotion over time is wiring our brain. And it's also part of why you hear that you're the sum of the five people you spend the most time around, or that if you're in a long-term marriage with somebody, you over time take on their expressions or their body, their mannerisms, or we say similar things to them. And so we're always being conditioned, and our diet has to be looked at as, yes, your food, but it's also who you spend time around. It's the things that you're consuming through social media or television. It's the people the types of conversations you're having. Are you always gossiping with people? I mean, that's conditioning you. And I think it's really powerful too for people to recognize that when they choose those things in a healthy way, the quality of their lives improves dramatically. And obviously, that's a commitment and a practice. But when we keep practicing things with consistency across time, that builds new neural networks and it creates entirely new outcomes for us.
So are you a television watcher?
Hardly, honestly.
Are you on social media? I know you have a channel and I know you're active there and have a big following, but are you actively seeing where your friends are on vacation right now?
So I will be really honest. I like live under a rock. I am very careful about what I do consume, probably because I've done a lot of pruning on my brain and the things that I want to bring in and not. My team manages my social media. I don't, post or upload it. Of course, I record social media content and I love teaching. So I love to
Yeah.
create and share and teach. But no, I don't use social. I don't have a personal social media account on Instagram or anything. It's all directed to our business account. So yeah, I'm not a big social media person, not a big television
So
person.
do me a favor, because our audience needs to hear this, and the guy asking the question needs to hear it. Why not? Television's great. The entertainment value, it's cheap now. Social media will keep you entertained. So why do you choose when you're this intentional through
Yeah.
mistakes you made in your life, through addictions that grabbed your life and almost took you all the way down? You live differently today because of it. And because of that, you live differently than almost anybody else listening to our conversation.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I'm very aware of like my diet, and I believe we have a brain diet and a consuming diet just as much as we have a physical diet. And to be honest, I've just found, I remember years ago I started watching this show. I'll tell you an example. I remember years ago I started watching this show. It was called like How to Get Away with Murder or something. And it was like it was an interesting show, like kind of an investigative show. I remember noticing that after watching that show for like I watched it on a Sunday with my husband. And I remember the next day, we were both a little under the weather and we stayed and watched it for a few hours. And I remember the next day I was in the shower and I was like, what's that noise at the door? Is somebody going
You know what?
And
I thought you were going to say, I think if I buy bleach, a shovel, and some bags, I can get rid of my husband
no,
tomorrow afternoon.
no.
So I'm glad you were at least concerned someone else is coming for you rather than
Yeah,
your
I just
husband.
remember thinking, oh my gosh, now I have all these horror thoughts because I watched this scary thing, and you'd be surprised when you're paying attention at how much things like seep their way into your
For sure.
mind. And I'm not sitting here saying like nobody should watch television or things like that. I've really noticed as a human being when I paid close attention that I also feel truly recharged by
Yes.
things that are like a good podcast or an inspiring conversation or a good story or being out in nature or
Yes.
exercising or playing a sport. I love pickleball. Those things like fill my soul and they nurture me. And if I ever sit down and watch television, I just feel stale afterwards. I don't feel recharged. And I think there's a meaningful difference that a lot of people are not paying attention to. And that's because they're in autopilot coping mode. And then we have a culture and a society that's tapping into that. They're like, yeah, lots of people are coping. Let's give them the dopamine hits and the addiction of the scrolling and the bright colors on social media to get them engaged so they stay on the platform. And there's people who spend a lot of time trying to engineer those things for people. So, yeah.
Well, that was the public service announcement for today. Go ahead and cut the cable, my friends. You will be far healthier and far more vibrant in your life afterwards. So, Thais, I have a whole bunch of your quotes that I've written down through readings that I've done of you and podcasts I've listened to and studies I've done around your work. I'm not going to get through them all, but here come a few. Tell me what you meant when you said these words. Relationships do not create our wounds, they reveal them.
Yeah. So we develop something called core wounds from childhood, and it's the meaning we give to painful experiences so we can store them and protect ourselves from them. And that, for example, is as small as if somebody grew up with critical parents, they probably make that mean I'm not good enough. I'm just never, nothing I do is ever good enough. And then we see the world through that lens. And then somebody comes in and they trigger us.
Yeah.
And what a trigger is a stored, preconditioned wound and the reason it hurts so much when we have disproportionate reactions is somebody comes and they push on it like it's a painful button. And it's almost like our subconscious mind says, oh, here's all the times you felt not good enough before. And it floods all that emotion forward because your subconscious mind actually stores all memories. It consolidates them, but it stores all of them with all the emotion attached. And now you're triggered because you're experiencing all the past times you felt not good enough combined with what's happening in this moment. And that's why we react disproportionately. It's our subconscious pre-existing wounds. So oftentimes, and a favorite quote of mine is by Rumi, he says, if I'm irritated by every rub, how will I ever be polished?
Hmm.
And I believe that people are giving the opportunity for us to polish ourselves when they come in and they push on our wounds. They're revealing us to ourselves so we can actually see, oh, I have this wound, and we can do that in our works if we choose to rewire and to heal and change it.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Here comes the next one. Conflict is largely the result of unmet needs that we aren't even consciously aware of.
Yeah. So everybody has a personal domain, and this is the subconscious expectations, the conditioning that they have about what needs should be met in a relationship. And oftentimes you could have somebody who's more quiet in a relationship and loves their independence and autonomy pair up with somebody who needs a lot of reassurance and a lot of attention. And they go into the relationship together, and we all have our own subconscious pre-existing expectations. And the independent person's sitting there going, oh, I'm going to get lots of independence in a relationship. That's what relationships are. And then the more reassurance needing person needs something else. And when they pair up together, the difference in their conditioning is often what the roots of conflict are. They have different expectations, then they're not meeting each other's expectations or needs. And then all of a sudden it comes out as an eruption where the person says, you never reassure me. And the other person says, you never respect my freedom. But in that moment, there's both a crisis and an opportunity because part of merging and being in relationship to somebody else means tearing down the invisible walls that stand between the two of you because of your conditioning. And the only way we can do that is through communication. So when somebody says, hey, I need more reassurance, and the other person says, okay, I can reassure you, but can you give me some space and time sometimes to do my own thing? If we can do it in a healthy way and be willing to hear each other out and know our needs and how to communicate them, we actually tore down invisible walls and got closer as a result.
Hmm. Final quote. Without witnessing emotions, you are at their mercy.
Because if
Think
we
of what we've chatted about, but it's such a great banger of a line. So without witnessing emotions, you are at their mercy.
Absolutely, because then they are possessing you. We are in every given moment either witnessing our emotions or being possessed by them. And the moment that you are possessed, you become deeply identified with them. They take you over and you act through them. So, for example, if you're anxious, you're now panic calling or texting somebody. Or if you're angry, you're now raising your voice. Or if you're sad, sometimes we wallow and we tell ourselves the poor me stories from that space. The moment that we're not witnessing our emotions, they've fully taken us over. And now they're determining our thought patterns and our behaviors and everything to follow. And so when we can start witnessing, that brings our conscious mind back online. And now we can choose something differently and we regain a healthy sense of empowerment and control.
What belief about yourself took longest to heal?
You know what's funny? The belief that I am unsafe. That was the biggest, that took the longest for me to heal because I didn't recognize that I felt that way. I was really good at coping. So when I would feel unsafe, I was like, no, I'll take care of myself. I'll stand up for myself. But what I didn't recognize that I was almost always living in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. My nervous
Yeah.
system was always in sympathetic nervous system mode, in other words. And so when I finally was like, oh, wait, I do feel this way. And then I was able to do nervous system regulation work along with core wound rewiring and actually work through that belief. That's when I finally had that relief and felt a lot more anchored in my life as a result.
You've helped thousands at this point in your career. I mean, it's a remarkable stat. A woman who could not help the reflection in the mirror in her early 20s now has this laundry list of lives elevated because of your journey. So I'm curious, what have you learned about what we were all searching for along the way? What's that ache that we all possess?
I think that at the end of the day, there's two things that get people stuck the most that I think they're yearning for deeply. That if we can give to ourselves first, really change everything in our external world. I've seen these same two common threads. One is that people don't know how to give themselves self-compassion because we grew up in this system of punishment reward where you're punished for doing things wrong and rewarded for doing things right. So we play it out on ourselves. We make a mistake and we punish ourselves. We think mean things about ourselves and we're so tough on ourselves. And we equate that to learning.
Mm.
But people actually learn much better when they're less in self-punishment and more in compassion and accountability. So, for example, one thing on my own journey is I used to beat myself up like crazy when I would make a mistake. I was so mean to myself. And I was like, I am not doing that anymore. That's not helping me. I wouldn't like anybody else to talk to me that way. Why am I talking to myself like that? And I was super accountable about that. And when I made a mistake, I would be like, oh, I'm a human. I made a mistake.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'm learning. And what am I going to do about it? Where, how am I going to course correct? And right away, I'm in like action mode and recovery mode and trying to actually take an action step instead of beating myself up, which in my own personal journey, as soon as I would beat myself up a lot, I would want to use again. So it was really important for me to work through that. The second one is that people think they're looking for love so much all the time, like love from outside of themselves and romantic love. And romantic love is such a beautiful thing, of course. And like, I'm so grateful in my own life for my husband and all of that. But we have a really hard time being in healthy romantic love or accepting healthy romantic love until we learn to self-attune enough.
What was that
And
word you used? Self in
self
tune?
self-attune. So in childhood, securely attached kids, people who have the highest level of relationship success statistically by attachment style, they get one big ingredient in their childhood that is the foundation that all their healthy relationships are built on, and it's attunement. It's their parents being present with them,
Okay.
able to engage with their emotions. If they're stressed, they say, honey, I noticed you're stressed. What's wrong? And it's not perfect. They don't get attunement 100% of the time, but it's consistent enough. And I notice that every person who really struggles in relationships, they struggle to attune to themselves, to be in their bodies, to know what they're feeling. And if you don't know what you're feeling, you can't identify your needs, you can't identify your triggers. And I find that people, when they can't attune to themselves, they're always seeking, it's pain to not be able to self attune. And then when we can't recognize what's happening inside of our inner world, we seek to cover up all this discomfort. We're like, well, let me just turn on the TV and distract. Let
Yeah.
me scroll through my phone. And so being able to cultivate the power to be in your body and sit with your emotions a little bit and just notice and just listen is so profoundly healing. And it helps us not jump to conclusions in relationships. It helps us have more patience. It helps us to have more bandwidth. We feel more recharged and in touch with ourselves and our needs. We can communicate better. It's really a deep root that's not talked about enough, in my opinion, that's a necessary ingredient for healing. So if I had to say like two really big roots, self-compassion and attunement.
It's good. Where can folks learn more about the work you do?
So I am on YouTube. I am at Thais Gibson Personal Development School or at personaldevelopmentschool.com, where we go through all these different neuroscience and online courses.
So I'm going to walk through what we call the Live Inspired Seven right now. The first one's probably going to be one of the more difficult of the seven for you to answer because you're so well read. So we call these the Live Inspired Seven. Thais, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Oh my gosh, I have two. Two that I love and they're easy reads and I highly recommend. Three, I gotta say three. Okay, first one, Very easy read. Don Miguel Ruiz, The Mastery of Love. So beautiful. It's a very simple read. Second, A Thousand Names for Joy by Byron Katie. And third, The Untethered Soul by
Wow.
Michael Singer. And they're very deep introspective books about self-love and relationship to self. And they're just very powerful and eye-opening. And you can feel your brain opening up as you read them.
What's one positive characteristic or one trait you possessed as a little girl growing up that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
You know what I miss that I need to do more of is I was very playful. And I've been in a busy season of life and I'm not making enough time for just play and free time. I'm a little too in my serious self and my planning and organizing and all that. And it's something I want to make sure I'm making room for this season.
If your home caught fire and your husband and maybe any animals you may have are out safely, and you have an opportunity of running back into the house and grabbing one item, what's that one physical thing you would grab?
In all honesty, I would definitely say my laptop. A very bland answer, but it's got all my work and my courses and teachings and writings in there. And I journal every evening. Like I hardly miss it ever. And when I have really good journal prompts that help me, I actually like I upload them to my notes and computer so I can reflect back on them. So everything important to me tends to be in there.
We got the laptop and we watch it burn. If you could live on a gorgeous lake and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to have a conversation with today?
You, as I'm living on the gorgeous lake right here.
We are. That's the first time O'Leary's ever been brought up. 900 conversations.
No,
Interviewed my
I
own
would
mom, and she didn't want me on the bench. I think she chose MLK. So I'm glad to be hanging out.
to say, living or deceased, I would say Jesus or the Buddha. I would say one of those two.
Maybe there's room for both on the bench.
Yeah.
What's the best advice that either Jesus, the Buddha, or anyone else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received is,
Can it be a quote? I love certain quotes. I'm trying to think of personal advice. The best advice somebody ever gave me was my friend and mentor who said, Your conscious mind can't outwill your subconscious mind. That was it for me. That changed my life. That same person who was a really powerful person in my life, a wonderful mentor at a really hard time, really taught me the power and the importance of forgiveness. And it was something I could not understand at that time in my life. I was like an expert at grudge holding
hmm,
and really convinced me to give it a fair shot and to understand it deeply. I had to really research forgiveness to understand how to actually feel it instead of just try to intellectualize my way there and say I forgive. And that has been life changing for me. The absence of forgiveness feels like poison. And I was so used to that at the time that I couldn't even distinguish it. But then as I learned to
hmm.
work through things and purge through a lot of that, the idea now in my life of holding on to a grudge is very painful to think about. And so that's been a really life changing thing for me.
If you could go back in time and whisper some wisdom to yourself at age 20, what would you say?
I'd probably try to give myself a little bit of hope because I was having a hard time then. A little into the year 20, my life started to change. But before that, early in the year, I would say to me, a big one was the way I was so mean and cruel to myself in my
Hmm,
thoughts was really, once I cracked that, I was able to stay sober. But I would do this thing even when I stopped using painkillers, and I really struggled with alcohol for about a year. And I would do this thing where I would come home from work and I would try to be reading and I would open a bottle of wine because I was doing this kind of on my own and not what I recommend people to do. I wasn't on a traditional, journey fully. And I would drink I'd say, I'm just gonna have one glass of wine. And then I would drink a whole bottle of wine. And then I would beat myself up and say, Oh my God, look, you're doing this. You're gonna go backwards. You're gonna go back to it's gonna be painkillers again. It's gonna be this, it's gonna be that. And I would beat myself up and then I would walk across. I was living in the US at the time. I would walk across the street to the gas station and buy another bottle of wine and drink that too. And when I learned to be compassionate and really like anchor that in and practice that and really stick to it and really condition it because I had to recondition those thought processes over time. I didn't have anything I was trying to numb all the time. I could actually sit with myself without all this like distraction and numbing and using. And I wish I just learned that a little earlier on.
hmm. You've almost made it. We've gone through six. Here comes number seven. Thais Gibson, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
It's funny. I don't like think about myself that way very much. So this is a good one. In one sentence, I would want it to be something that like other people just learn from. Like I would want it to be something that, I- you know, I, is not about me as a person, but about like if somebody read it, they'd be like, oh, that just helped me. I think I would want it to be something like that, like a good quote. So it may be a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think I would say something like that quote I mentioned in passing earlier. This was so beautiful for me on my journey too. I really tried to practice this and live this. Is this old quote? It says, "He who hates evil only creates more of it." And that was so beautiful in my journey too. I read it as a single sentence in the book. It wasn't some outstanding quote. It was this little sentence. And I remember realizing that one thing I did a lot after I got sober and changed a lot, but something I had to work on in relationships is I used to think if somebody hurt me first, that like I could say whatever I wanted back. I could do whatever I wanted back because you started it. And I realized that so frequently in relationships, I was becoming what I was judging.
Yeah.
So if somebody was critical to me, I hated that they were critical. So I hated the critical part. And then I would become double critical back for them being critical. And then I was becoming what I was judging. He who hates evil creates more of it. And that was so powerful for me to start practicing like, wait, what standard am I holding myself to? I can approach that differently instead of becoming what I'm upset about.
Mm.
And I really stuck to that and saw that through. And that changed the trajectory of my relationships in a really powerful way and allowed me to break down some patterns. So I think if I had to say that, it's not about me, but it's about a quote that I would want people to hear and feel like, oh, that opened something in them and had the capacity in a sentence to help them pivot just a little bit enough to maybe change their life.
Well, turning that into a positive, Thais Gibson loved goodness and created a lot more of it. And I appreciate that I get to consider you a friend and someone I look up to. I think you do great, meaningful work. Well done. Good and faithful servant.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
My friends, that's Thais Gibson. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift it is. Live with your soul on fire.
My friends, before we wrap up this episode fully and move on into the next step of our lives, there's one thing Thais said that I've been thinking about since the conversation wrapped. Whether we realize it or not, the experiences we had growing up shape so much of how we move through our life today. I think it's underrated how our childhood and those influences back then of the way we were parented, the way we were taught, the experiences we had, change the way we interact with life today. They influence how we respond to conflict, how we handle stress, how we show up in relationships, and even how we talk to ourselves when no one else is around. I think that's why this conversation you just had with Thais and me matters so much. Not so much so we can blame our past for our present, but so we can better understand ourselves, because once we do, we see the patterns. And then once we see that, we can pay attention to how better to change it going forward. So if you enjoyed this episode, I think you'll love the conversation that I had with my friend. She wasn't as well known then. She certainly is now. Her name is Mel Robbins. Mel shares a simple tool that helped her break out of her own unhealthy patterns and started moving her life forward one decision at a time. It's practical, it's encouraging, and it's a great reminder that lasting change does not usually happen all at once. It's not some mighty explosion, my friends. It's incremental steps we make daily on purpose. It starts with one small choice: to tune in to the Mel Robbins podcast with John O'Leary. Listen in way back at episode 87, or come on over with me right now to the website, johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. We'll have a link right there for you. So family and friends, I want to thank you for being part of our Live Inspired podcast community. I want to remind you something the media does not. The foundation is firm. There is reason for hope, and the best is yet to come. So for this time, and until next time, my name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth
every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son, Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.